When we test and develop recipes, we are often stuck with those extra bits of vegetables and pantry items that we need to use up. But what if you took that idea and turned it into an entire book about zero-waste home cooking? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Kate.
So you're cooking at home. I know you cook a lot.
Yep.
What do you do with all those extras? You know, when you have you only need a quarter of a yellow onion, when you only need, half a leek, what happens?
Well, they start to get wrinklier and more dried out and desiccated. And to be honest, I actually do usually use them unless they're way too far gone. But I find a way. I do take certain satisfaction in using up my scraps if I can. But of course, there's still, it's like when you cook a lot and you're not great about managing your fridge, which I'm often not. Right. Things go to waste sometimes. How about you, Kate?
I think I'm the same. It depends. If I'm just doing my normal, cooking for the week, I can kind of get through what I've put out there. I like to have all my vegetables ready to go at the beginning of the week, and I know what I have. But sometimes when I'm developing recipes for other people, I might need that tub of sour cream that I only use half of, and then I kind of forget to use the rest of the sour cream, and then when I find it again, it's got the layer of mold on top. That stuff. Yeah. I'm definitely guilty of that.
It's such a reality, I think, for anybody, but then especially when you're in that recipe development and buying excessive amounts of food.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is we're talking to authors who really make it fun to say, shop your kitchen, shop your fridge. That. Isn't that such a great idea? Because now it's I can save money. I don't have to go to the store. I can just figure out something to do, from the quarter cup of chickpeas in their cooking liquid. And maybe I've got a piece of ginger that's not ready for prime time, but it's still, gingery enough.
Yeah.
And so, these are sometimes I know I need to use them up and I know I could figure out a way. But sometimes when it's at night and I'm tired, I just want to download all that information to somebody else so they can tell me what to do.
Yeah, they basically help you make the decision. I also love the idea of shopping your kitchen, which is like shopping your closet, instead of buying more clothing, but actually bringing out pieces and finding new ways to wear them. So it's bringing out the old onion and finding a new way to use it.
Exactly. So today we're talking all about ways to make shopping your kitchen fun. And to do that, we're bringing on sisters Margaret, though she goes by May, and Irene Li. They are the authors of Perfectly Good Food, a totally achievable zero-waste approach to home cooking. I kind of think this is sort of a must-have for people who cook a lot at home, for people who develop recipes for other people. It just kind of takes that guesswork out of what to do with the extras and just gives you some fresh ideas you might have not considered.
It's also great for people who are just learning how to cook, and maybe you want to develop, rather than having to follow every single recipe to the T, but learning to develop that cooking instinct. I feel like it's a really good book for that as well.
Absolutely. So essentially, May and Irene, with their brother, they co-founded a food truck and restaurant company in Boston. And then that has since evolved into a dumpling and prepared food company called May Dumplings. May also created a website called Food Waste Feast, and that is all about, helping people reduce waste in the kitchen. She now lives in Glasgow, Scotland, while Irene is still in Boston. But the two are such a team. It's really going to be fun to sort of just hear about the story of how this book came to be.
I cannot wait.
Let's bring them on. Hi, Irene and May. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to chat with you both.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Irene, and I am the baby of the family, and I live in Boston. I'm May. I'm the middle sister, but the older one of the two of us, and I live in Glasgow, Scotland.
We're very excited to talk about this awesome book that you both have written together, Perfectly Good Food. And I'd love to just start by talking about the premise. It's cook better, save money, reduce waste. And food waste is something we all grapple with. So I'm wondering how you came up with the idea to write a book about this.
So I think it really started when we ran a restaurant together with our older brother. We started a food truck and restaurant in Boston and immediately learned how, as business owners, you have to be keeping really careful track of your food because any food that doesn't get used, you're throwing your money in the trash, essentially. And writing our first cookbook, Double Awesome Chinese Food, kind of realized how many recipes are written in ways that are so specific that you end up going out to the store and buying something and maybe not knowing how to use up the rest of it. And so putting those two things together, we realized that as home cooks, a lot of people could use more guidance and support in how to reduce food waste in their homes, and figured that there could be a cookbook written in a way that was sort of a different style of recipe writing in order to support people trying to cut down on waste in their homes.
And I'll add that May has two amazing, adorable children who, they love fresh fruit and they can sometimes be very picky. And so May, in her resourcefulness, has kind of applied a lot of professional kitchen techniques to trying to figure out what to do with the odds and ends and the scraps that you might have in your kitchen. And so I think that also played into this moment that we're seeing around zero waste and waste reduction. Plus, May has always been that person who, you can invite her over to the house and be like, oh, there's nothing to eat. We have to order takeout. And she'll be like, don't worry about it. And then half an hour later, she's gone through all your cupboards. Maybe she's thrown out a couple things that really needed to go, but she's also identified a bunch of ways to use different ingredients. And, this dinner has materialized out of nowhere. And you're like, how do I get in your brain and understand how you did that?
Yeah, I love that idea because your book is really about shopping your fridge, shopping your pantry, using what you already have, saving money. It's just so practical, but it's done in a really fun and sort of inviting way. I mean, I just love, I'll just read a note from the introduction. You open your fridge and stare at the wilted kale and droopy cilantro, an old bag of carrots, and chicken thighs nearing the expiration date. The apples are wrinkled and those nice avocados you splurged on don't look so nice anymore. What to do? And it's kind of like you are writing it in the second person. You're inviting the reader to say, hey, we're gonna be there for you. We're gonna be your food waste coach, or just get you excited to use up what you already have. But it's also done with I love you have a note in the introduction that says the future of our planet does not rest solely on your ability to eat all the broccoli leaves. So it's not, you know what I mean? There's just a playfulness there. How did you both download things from May's brain and make a book that's also very easy to use? I mean, the structure, we'll talk about that, but it's, this book reads very easily, but I would imagine that in the front side, when you're brainstorming it, it took a lot of work to get there.
Yeah, I think, preceding the book project, May had been writing this blog called Food Waste Feast, which I think in itself kind of evokes the sort of sense of fun and irreverence and casualness of the way we approach food. And I think that what people really responded to on the blog and on her Instagram account was that she's just really relatable. And there are a lot of people who preach zero waste, who preach kind of eco-friendly practices, who, let's be honest, are not relatable. And so I think that we all kind of need that friend or trusted advisor or coach, as you said, who can help us be better, but also not be too serious, not be too pedantic or judgmental. And I think May's voice, and I say her voice because she did write most of the cookbook. I'm just a banging copy editor. But
Wait a second. I got to hear more about that.
Yeah. So May has been, the lead author on both of our books. And I am very ruthless with her run-on sentences. And also, I have my own kind of cooking style and best practices because I cook differently at home than May does. So I think our powers combined, we've been able to do some great work, but I think it really is in her relatability. I don't know, just she gets it, man. And that's kind of what we all need, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I also still throw things away, and there's no getting around it. That is the world that we live in, and we're lucky to be often. If you're able to cook from a cookbook, you might have sort of the abundance where you can just go to the grocery store and pick out all these ingredients, and that's great. And it's not like zero waste is anything new. It's for most of human history, it's just cooking. It's just you just produce with what you have, and you do your best to extend your ingredients in the best way. But a lot of times, ingredients now are affordable a lot of the time. maybe getting less so these days with food costs. But the idea is that we kind of end up buying more than we need. And I throw stuff out too, and that's fine. Ideally, we just compost it, and then you can feel much better about it. So I think that, not being too judgmental about the way that people cook and just trying to be that friend who will help you forage your fridge makes it much more accessible, and ideally brings it home to people in a way that they wouldn't think of it when it seems impossible.
The other thing about the tone is like, if it doesn't feel fun, if it feels painful or overly wrought, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, it's also like, you just have to do what works for you. And we want to get you as close to that point as possible. On our book tour, we stopped at our cousin's house just outside of DC, and we had eaten salad, and, she was like throwing the last bits in the compost and was like, "Oh, I don't want you to see me do this." And we were like, it's okay. Like, we throw stuff out all the time, and we present this book as kind of a toolbox or a toolkit. And whenever you need a certain tool, hopefully now you have it at your fingertips, but we don't expect you to do everything in the book. That would be kind of crazy.
That would be extreme. Yeah.
But, just giving people more options and making sure that they feel empowered and not overwhelmed by the task in front of them.
And really get that feeling of satisfaction that I think that you can get when you've managed to put together something, especially if you go like off recipe a little bit and you substituted something, you're like, wow, I made that. I'm amazing. Like, that's such a great, satisfying feeling. And if you can get that from putting together what you have in your fridge instead of just following someone else's instructions, that it's an empowering thing for people who are in the kitchen, and you're just more likely to do it again and make something up a little more or go off recipe a little further. And that helps everyone in the long run in the kitchen.
Yeah.
We did a great book event with Vivian Howard, who is also an incredible cookbook writer. And what she said was, when I figure out how to use up that last thing, I just think, damn, I'm smart.
I love it.
I think we all had that feeling. And so that's kind of, again, the attitude that we hope comes through in the book.
Yeah, it's so smart and relatable, as you said. And I have found sometimes with food waste books, especially when it's coming from a restaurant chef who maybe doesn't have as much experience in the home kitchen, it's like, pop it in your dehydrator or something like that, which, it is a great way to preserve ingredients. But again, I think most home cooks don't necessarily have a dehydrator and aren't going to do it.
Right. Yeah. And that's another reason why it was great having the balance between me and Irene, because, I left our restaurant a while ago and started writing the cookbooks, being the lead author. And I was cooking at home all the time and cooking for my family and everything. But Irene, I could, ask her questions, what would you guys do in the restaurant? What's your professional point of view on this? Give me this other perspective that I think is helpful. There are really useful tools there that are professional chef ideas, like Irene's use Eat Me First box is this box that she started walking at a restaurant. And it was so smart because then the cooks knew where to go to get, what they should use first before they use something else. And then now we talked about that in people's home refrigerators, and they're all like, oh my gosh, that's so smart. And I can just do that right now. I can just, go get a box. There's probably some kind of box in your house, put it in your fridge. And it's so useful.
Next week, I'm actually going to set up a Use Me First section in my fridge. I told Kate that. I was like, that's so smart.
Yeah. It's so smart. When you have like that half an onion and like, you've got that, like you say on the illustration on page 17, there's that like celery that's kind of a little soft, too soft for maybe just eating raw, but you can chop it up. It's perfectly fine for tuna salad. And you have all those notes. The Eat Me First shelf is such a good idea of like taking something from a restaurant that's kind of just what you do in a restaurant and putting it in a home kitchen. It's like, oh, then I don't have to dig around and see where that half onion is.
For me, it was always the lemon halves. I'd cut half a lemon and they would migrate to the back of the fridge. And then I'd clean my fridge and I'd have 4 moldy lemon halves in the back of the fridge. And now I know where they go. They go in the Eat Me First box.
Absolutely. Well, tell me about how did you come up with the table of contents structure? I mean, it's divided up between, getting started, then you have a section on vegetables, fruits, proteins, and dairies. How did the structure come together?
That is a great question and something we wrestled with for a very long time because we didn't know how to, it's not kind of topic that lends itself to your classic cookbook structure or like appetizers and then soups and then this and that. And so there were a lot of, brainstorming sessions of trying to map it out on paper. And I think one of the fundamental ideas that I think we wanted to showcase in the book that helped us figure that out is that if you can learn how to substitute and categorize things, it makes it easier to use things up, because you can have a recipe that has carrots, for example. And if you don't have any carrots, but you've got beets, you could kind of cook them in similar ways. And they'll work in a lot of recipes to swap one for another. And so if all of the hard vegetables were together, if all of the leafy greens were together, if all of the citrus were in one category, then it meant that you could kind of go to that category and know that you could generally, with some exceptions, do a recipe that used up one for the other, that saves you from going into the store and getting that very specific item and using something else you've got already. And so once we realized that the categories made things a little bit easier, we put all of the vegetables together and then divided that to categories, all the fruits, and then divided that into categories. And that meant you can kind of use it as a field guide. Ideally, you can page through and find out the category that you need for whatever's in your fridge right now. But also you can kind of page through it and learn, here's some ways to change one thing out for another in one meal or dish.
Yeah, it's funny. I do feel like, it's going to be one of those books where if I'm planning meals for the week, I feel like this book will probably always be in that meal planning rotation, because I'll be shop the fridge. What's there? How can I use it up?
I love that. Yeah, that's so awesome to hear.
Yeah, it's so friendly in that way. And the recipes are so flexible, which you mentioned, writing your first book, you buy, let's say, a bunch of cilantro and maybe you only use half of it for a recipe because that's what the recipe needs. And there is that reality in recipe development that there's just always this excess. And then if you're going to be always following recipes fairly religiously, you'll have excess or leftovers. I guess, how did you figure out how to write such a flexible recipe?
That is a great question, because we wrestled with that a lot also. Writing a cookbook and getting a style guide from the publisher, and they say 1 teaspoon of this, 1 teaspoon of chopped parsley, stems removed, or something like that. And then you have this bunch minus 1 teaspoon of parsley, and you've thrown out all this other stuff. That is so specific. And I guess, number one, when cooking at home, both of us don't tend to follow recipes. So we'll just put in all the parsley we've got. And we felt like there's so many recipes where I wanted to say, oh, you can use up as much of this as you want. It's fine. How much do you like? Do you like a really parsley heavy dish? Do you not? I don't know how you like it. If I, that's so flexible. That should be to your taste. But also wanting to make it so it wasn't just a free for all, because that's not helpful either.
Right.
So we tried to strike a balance of, here is what you're definitely going to need. You're going to need the puff pastry, and you're going to need about 6 cups of chicken. But then I think I called it a leftover pot pie or something. But then the vegetables, you can kind of use whatever vegetables you want. Do you like a pot pie with lots of carrots and peas? Cool. Put in 2 cups of that. Or if you want no carrots and peas at all, put in another vegetable or whatever. So we say, you're going to need X cups of vegetable chopped small, but pick what you want. And that's kind of the idea of trying to provide a bit of structure, but also some flexibility.
And that's not easy to do. How did you then test it? I mean, it sounds very rational when you're saying it's this is what we did, and that makes a lot of sense. But then I'm still thinking, maybe it's like PTSD from copy edits where it's but did you mean this? Can you have the stems, stems removed, all that? Is it 1/2 cup chopped, or is it 1/2 cup whole leaf then chopped? I mean, all that. So how did you get around that?
I think it goes back to the tone of the book and the idea that we want to help you build your intuition and kind of trust your senses and your instincts. And at the end of the day, it's just dinner.
Yes, I love that. I love that too.
If you mess it up, you just eat the evidence, or even, you compost it and you move on. We know that there are going to be moments in the book where people are like, I could use a little bit more specificity. And we're hopefully setting up a safe opportunity for them to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this my best shot or my best guess and see how it turns out. And to make it okay for it to not turn out exactly maybe how we intended it, but hopefully they're learning something in the process. I think when we make mistakes with substitutions, or we not a mistake, but we end up with a final product we don't like, nothing is more educational than having to eat something that you should not have substituted for something else. For example,
right.
I love a green smoothie, and a couple of months ago, I didn't have any spinach, but I did have a little arugula, and I was like, well, I don't know, let's just see what happens. And I was like, this is a peppery ass smoothie. Like, now I know. And so,
I love it. I'm thinking like embrace the rutabaga if you want to, but maybe rutabaga is not your friend, and that's okay. Get the parsnip next time.
right, yes, exactly. So trying to maybe kind of shift the culture around like cooking and recipes to be more forgiving, and to be less judgmental. And that's also why we ended up working with our illustrator, Iris Gottlieb, who is so funny and also does so much work that is kind of identifying these deeply relatable pieces of everyday life. And, we love beautifully, immaculately photographed cookbooks. But we knew that this could not be one of them, because your food is not going to come out the way ours did. And we don't care what it looks like. Like, we care if you had fun making it, if it tastes good, if it saved you money. And so we went with the illustrated route for so many reasons. But part of it was, again, kind of freeing people from the artifice of like, well, it doesn't look like that, so I must have messed it up.
Yes, totally. You pull a couple of cookbooks down to decide recipes for the week. Like, there are so many good cookbooks out there that are meticulously precise with their instructions and their ingredients. And we aim to sort of be there in the margins around that you went shopping and you bought all these things and you follow those recipes for a T and they're going to turn out well. And then ours allows you to just figure out what to do with what's left, because those are never going to come in the exact ingredient amounts that you want. And so if people kind of know that going into it, then this is their chance to be a bit more experimental or a bit more creative, or to kind of test themselves a little bit and be more creative with what they've got. And that allows you to sort of have a different experience cooking, probably, but hopefully learn something from it, and also get that satisfying feeling of like eating the food that you've spent money on and not seeing it go into the trash.
Yeah, you both said so many things, but one was It's Just Dinner, which I like that some of the recipes, they are these like, not basic, but simple. They're very simple, like blueprints. I think there is like a vegetable stew, and it's super flexible, and there's not a ton of ingredients. But then for a lot of the recipes, and I feel like this is maybe where your restaurant background comes in, there are these suggestions for like garnishes or finishes that might take it to another level.
Mm-hmm.
Just another thing I love about this book.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear a little bit about how you pitched the book to your publisher, Norton. Did you already have this structure pretty much firmly in place in terms of how you were going to write the recipes and the table of contents when you pitched the book?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember how we had the book organized in our proposal, and I actually can't remember. But I do know that from the beginning, we discussed illustration and paperback. And I think part of that is because, we wanted to make it really accessible. We wanted to make this a book that you could find it useful if you are a brand new cook who is just learning to find their way around the kitchen. And we wanted to make it accessible for someone who might have a ton of cookbooks and is very used to following recipes, but doesn't necessarily know what to do with the other stuff. And paperback, something that you could pull out at any time from your kitchen and, get it all messy and,
Spill some dip on it.
Exactly.
Right.
And then the illustration aspect also. And actually, funny enough, our amazing editor, Melanie from Norton, one of the things she wanted to make it like was, I can't remember the author, but it's this book called Home Comforts, which is actually like a cleaning book, or like a home, or almost like an old school Martha Stewart type book. But it's a paperback. I think it has illustrations. I think it's black and white. And the idea is that you can just kind of page through it and look for the thing that you want. It's almost like a how to manage your household field guide. And so from the beginning, we wanted to make it like very accessible in that sense.
We both give Melanie a ton of credit for being willing to kind of try something new with this book, and really encouraging us to proceed in the directions and ways that we felt most strongly about. And I think, she's just so encouraging, and she sees a lot of cookbooks. So I think she also maybe was excited to do something a little bit different.
And it was really awesome. She gave us free rein to suggest illustrators. And Iris was someone that Irene had been following for a long time. And she writes her own books also, and kind of has this science-y vibe. She has a book called Seeing Science, I think is what it's called. And so she kind of knows how to present data in interesting ways visually. And also, we loved her sense of humor and her relatability. So the ability to both illustrate food and make it attractive, but also have this sort of explanatory vibe. Some of the drawings are almost step-by-step or flowchart style of illustrations. And so we wanted someone who could bring all that together. And it's incredible what Iris did.
Did you give her the text for the illustrations, or was that all her? Because,
No.
like, for example, there was something in the scrap stock about, like, because we don't know how to make a corn cob pipe. Like
Put the
adding
corn cobs into
to the scrap. Yeah, adding.
Almost everything is Iris. We maybe made one or two suggestions.
Oh, how
but
cool.
a lot of them were from her
Got
it.
work, which we really loved.
It's so cool to kind of plant the seeds of an idea and to work with an illustrator who's so creative and so funny that they can really turn that into a final product. And I think all the little kind of notes and jokes that she wrote, we were like, okay, yeah, she totally gets it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It was really fun.
That's really cool. I really love it. Like, I'm looking at the freezer section, and there's, when you freeze liquids, you need to add a little room in the container so the liquid can expand when it freezes. And instead of like writing that in a really dry way, like I just said, she says from studio apartment, and you leave a little room, to one bedroom. It's like, just like quirky, but I get it. And it just really fits the tone of the book in general. So I thought, like Kristin did, that you had probably had to plant these, like the text, and then she illustrated around it. Because I don't know if that's how it usually works with illustrations, but I assume. So I love it that it was just a really great pairing of illustrator and authors.
Yes, absolutely. It was so fun to work with.
You love everything cookbooks, right? And we love making it for you. If you're ready to take this relationship to the next level, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you'll find links to our new merch, including the coziest t-shirts and sweatshirts, and our bookstore, where we earn commission from every book you buy. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Again, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support to find all the ways to show us love. And thanks for listening.
In a previous episode, we asked our listeners for like cookbook ideas, and somebody pitched like, what about like a freezer cookbook, a book that talked about all the things you can freeze. And we thought, well, it kind of could work, and I feel like when I saw this section in your book about how to use your freezer more effectively, it was like, oh, you don't need the book. You just need this book, because it then kind of ties into your whole, like what's going on in your fridge in general. And it just was like, oh yeah, there was just so many practical things that, label things and do this and do that. And it's like, oh yeah, it's sometimes stuff that you just kind of know, but you forget, but you have it all in this one nice resource.
Yes.
So, because you cook a lot, you're going to have to freeze things.
And that's a good mix of like professional tips that if you're working in a restaurant kitchen, you know how to label things. You get really good at your labeling, and you're having your Sharpie and your painter's tape and just putting that on everything, and how useful that is, because I think probably all of us have had that experience of pulling something out of the freezer that's been pushed all the way to the back, and you're just thinking, I was really sure I'd remember what this brown liquid was, and now I have no idea. What is it? And then just like picking up fun tips and talking to people and having people comment online or tell us, oh, my mom used to do this, or my grandmother used to do this. And there's so much accumulated wisdom around saving food, and also across cultures. And that was one of the cool things to explore in the book too. But also, our friend went to the farmer's market, and she asked the spinach farmer, like, what's the best way to store this? And he said, oh, you can just put that directly in the freezer. And that totally blew my mind. And now every time I have spinach that's, been hanging out in the fridge for too long, I just put the baby spinach right into the freezer. And then you can just take it out and put it right into a smoothie, or you can cook with it. And you don't want to put it in a raw salad, but it's there and perfectly good. And you've just saved yourself all this effort. Both of us are really lazy, so we tell you how to blanch, but we never do it ourselves.
And I love it that then you can use that frozen spinach in your smoothie instead of the arugula, because we now know that does not work.
Bingo. Yes, it all ties together.
Or make the sag paneer, right?
Right.
Like I saw sag paneer with many kinds of greens.
I like that. What about the other practical notes you have in here? In each section, you have like storage tips, store it right. You have the use it up ideas. You have save it for later, and then you can still eat it. All these kind
and then when to throw it away, which I think
a lot
also
of questions on that comes up quite often. Like, can I still eat?
Yeah, because people get freaked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say like a big question on expiration dates and really kind of doing a bunch of research into that and realizing how many people think that expiration dates are all about food safety and like, oh, if this date has passed, I can't eat it, I'm going to get sick. And kind of explaining that expiration dates are really almost always about the manufacturer's idea of when something's at its peak quality. Like that's exactly how they want it to taste. But that does not mean that you'll have to go to the hospital if you eat it a day after the expiration date's passed. And so much fascinating stuff that you never realize that people don't get taught. And, you know, if we can help demystify some of those things, you can find it really useful on a daily basis in your kitchen.
Yeah. And I think your question kind of gets at the way that the book is comprised of not just recipes, but also things that are smaller units of information than a recipe, like a quick tip or an idea that you don't need a recipe for, but we just wanted to like open this door for you. I think, you know, how to store it, like what did we learn about storing something? So that did require us to sort of take a step back and to map out, like, what are the things we're just really excited to tell people? Like, hey, you can freeze a whole lemon and still get everything you need out of it. So like taking a step back and saying, okay, here are the kind of categories of information we want to have for each section. And then we did kind of research and fill out our approach in all the different segments. Like, okay, we learned something really cool about how to store spinach. And now we're going to round it out with more information about how to store everything that we're talking about. So there was kind of an iterative process to it. But again, I think it's like the enthusiasm that comes from like wanting to tell a friend, and then really building out the rest of the structure around that.
I love that. It's actually, it's a good, just for anybody who wants to write a cookbook or other kind of book. It's like, what can you not wait to tell somebody about or teach them about, you know?
Right? That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Or like people will say at our book events all the time, like, this one thing that I learned, you know, whether it's from our book or from someone else who they talk to, like, this changed my life, and that's why I'm here telling you about it. Like, there's this sense of kind of generosity and sharing in the sort of zero waste sphere that I think is really cool and like not necessarily part of the rest of like the food media or cookbook world in quite the same way. Like the Washington Post article that we were featured in, like the comments were all people's best advice about this topic. And it was like, that's awesome. Like comment sections are crazy.
Yeah, they could be so nasty.
Everyone came here to kind of like take a penny, leave a penny. And I think that those are the sorts of things that are really memorable for people. And again, what we wanted to kind of anchor the book around.
There's the illustrations, but the design is also very friendly with a lot of bursts. I think that's what they're called. I know Andrea Nguyen, who's co-host with us. Sometimes her latest book had these like little bursts all throughout, and a lot of use of color. Like it's not, even though there are no like big 4-color photographs, it's still a very like vibrant, colorful book.
Yes.
So like, did this meet your vision?
Yeah, we had a fun chat with the art director, Ali Chi, and I remember saying, you know, we don't want this to be like a monochromatic vibe. We want it to feel eye-catching and fun. And I think it was Melanie. Someone said that this like yellow and purple on the cover was kind of like ugly cool, and we're like, cool, that's great. That's what we want to go for. Like, nothing about it is trying to be too beautiful. Like there are so many beautiful cookbooks out there, and it's fine that we're not one of them. It's like beautiful in its own way. Yeah, kind of like the food that you're going to cook that comes out of it. It's totally. Like, I'm weird. And also, we've heard feedback that a lot of folks have had their teens or preteen kids just like grab the book and start paging through it and then be like, I'm going to make some jam. And so in a way, I think like the friendliness of the cover and the approach, like you could say it's sort of a Trojan horse for like the message, which is really like, we want people to stop wasting food. But I think it's all part of one package. And so the more people who we can attract to the book, I think the more we all benefit from that. Totally.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about just like giving it to my daughter to look through. She's 11, and I think the design would attract her, but also, the short snippets of information everywhere. And then at school, they're learning about climate change and all of that. So it just ties to things that she's already doing in school.
Right. And it ties in really nicely with the illustrations because sometimes when there's illustrations in a book, they're almost hard to follow. They can look beautiful, but they're hard to actually figure out like what is going on. If it's especially like a step-by-step cooking demo, it could look cool, but I'm just like, just give me the text. Like I can't figure out the illustration. And these illustrations are just so clear and they tie in so well with the writing that it's kind of like you can go back and forth really easily. It's just, we have to talk about the idea for like the freezer stock of like having the bag in the freezer that you're just adding things to until the bag is full and then you can make your stock. You have this great story about it. And then you also, the illustrations that Iris did for you, like work so well together. I mean, did you have meetings about that? Like how did that kind of synthesis happen?
How did it happen?
Yeah, it's so funny because that was a complicated one to write because it's not exactly a recipe. It's more like a concept of something that you can start in your kitchen and learn how to do. And I think I honestly just sent the text to Iris and she figured it out, which is so cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a part of the amazing thing about how her brain and her illustrations work is that she knows how to visually communicate these concepts so well. And just, kind of figuring out that there's so much stuff that you can just pop in there and it's going to be different every time. And that's okay. There's all sorts of creative changes you can make and all sorts of different ways you can use it up and you'll learn what you like. And that's kind of fits into the whole idea.
Yeah.
You mentioned a book tour. I don't know. How are you getting the message out about this book?
Yeah, we went on the book tour just before the official publication date. And we actually we took our mom in her RV, or she took us rather. And we went down to Savannah, Georgia, and then we made 6 stops on our way back up to Boston. So it was a real, episode.
Like rockstar tour.
Yeah, it was super fun. And again, I think that like people kind of catch the bug on this topic and then come to a signing or reach out to us and they want to write something for their local paper. Or, we had this amazing feature in the New Yorker with Dana Goodyear, and that was a fluke. But it was like when someone has grown up kind of thinking about these ideas and is always in their kitchen thinking about less waste, I think when we find someone of that tribe, we are like, I need to talk to you about this. And so I think a lot of how the word gets out is word of mouth, kind of like referring people. Like a lot of folks buy the book and they're like, I can't wait to give this to XYZ person in my life.
Oh my gosh, yeah, remember the grandmother? We did a book talk at a library in Boston, and the grandmother bought 4 copies for all of her grandkids who are all sort of in their early 20s, just kind of starting their cooking journey.
And she was like, they don't know anything about anything. And we were like, okay.
Like, that's so awesome. We love that. Yeah. And it was also cool because we did some events at bookstores, but also, for example, in Raleigh, we did an event with a Towards Zero Waste group at a zero waste shop. And so you kind of get this interesting, different demographic of people who, some people would go to a bookstore event because they're really into books and cookbooks. But this is a group of people who kind of have, are really good at composting and not using plastic and, taking their recycling to the right facilities, but maybe don't know how to cook in a way that aligns with their values. And so you kind of come at it from that aspect also. And I think that was one of the things that is trying to make the book really approachable for people who, maybe you want to cut down on your grocery bill, or maybe you're a really big environmentalist, or maybe you just want to use up the ingredients that you have because you love cooking and you want to be more in tune with your ingredients. So there's so many ways that you can come at it that we're hoping people will find something in there that they really resonate with. And then this becomes more of a lifestyle change that is easy to pick up in a way that works for them.
And going back to what we were talking about before with like kind of building instinct and teaching intuitive approaches to cooking, like we don't have home ec anymore. And I think for so many people, like food is something that happens to them. And they don't have control, or they don't feel that they have control. And we actually, I sold a book recently to a father who had a child who was struggling with disordered eating. And part of the way they were approaching that was saying, okay, like here's how you can prepare your own food and have a sense of control over it rather than the disordered eating being the element of control. And that, really struck me because I think that food is so immediate. And when we don't feel like we're empowered to play a role in how we interact with it, I can see how that causes a lot of problems. And so even if it's not about waste, even if it's not about the environment, if it's just about kind of being more flexible as a cook and giving cooks more tools for their toolkit, I think we'll feel that's a success, even if that's all the book accomplishes.
Right. It's that flexibility. You're giving people the blueprint to just play around and know that, here are the basics. You can riff on it. You don't have to use the precise amount of chopped parsley in your tabbouleh or whatnot. I did want to ask the recipe list itself. How did you come up with the recipes you wanted to include in this book? Because I think in the introduction, you said this book is coming up with the recipes, it's as gratifying as solving a puzzle. And I wanted to know how the recipe list itself came to be, because there's so many directions you could have taken.
Definitely. There's a cookbook list at the end of the book because we went through a lot of cookbooks and found so many dishes that really are useful for using up dishes. But also hero recipes are at the beginning of most of the chapters, but particularly the vegetable ones, because so many people unfortunately find themselves with an abundance of vegetables they don't know what to do with. And we wanted to offer this idea of a recipe that could kind of take whatever you've got, like a frittata or a stew or a pot pie. You could just toss in so many things. And if you can get that blueprint down in your mind and in your repertoire, that's a really satisfying way to use lots of things up.
And starting with the hero recipes kind of allowed us to make sure that we were checking a lot of ideas off the list with just, a 1 or 2 page spread in the cookbook. So could we have written a book of all pot pie recipes? Probably. But creating the hero recipe and saying here's the recipe to riff on helped us feel like we didn't have to be as exhaustive. And then, as we were saying before, there were a lot of ideas or dishes that didn't merit a full recipe. And so being able to say hey, this one's just a tip. It's not going to get a full page or an illustration or a yield or any of that stuff. But it's just to kind of open your mind in this other direction. And so I think that's part of how we came up with the recipe list and tried not to go too crazy because we have a tendency to do that.
How did it change? I mean, compared to the first book you did. So those recipes, you wrote them in more of the traditional recipe sort of style where it had to be, precise measurements. You called for specific ingredients because you had to be true to those recipes. Here, you went into a different direction. Anything you learned from your first book?
So one of the recipes in our first book really led to this idea because it's called traditional-ish pork dumplings, because we grew up making Chinese pork dumplings at home, and our mom would always go to Chinatown to get either Napa cabbage or Chinese chives as a very specific part of this recipe. And Irene and I are 100% too lazy to go on a special trip to get greens. And so we kind of realized that you could use the kale that's languishing in the back of your crisper drawer, or you could use the baby spinach that you were going to put in a salad. And that just provides this 1 cup of leafy green. And to be honest, it doesn't matter that much unless you are really aiming for a truly specific recipe. And so the publisher allowed us to say 1 cup of any leafy greens that you have, just, chopped finely or whatever it is. And that kind of led to this whole idea of you can be more flexible in certain aspects of your recipe, because everything else about that is, 1 teaspoon soy sauce or whatever it is. And I think that was the stepping stone. That was kind of the gateway to writing these recipes that had much more flexible parts to them.
No, that's really smart. And then how did you test out these more flexible recipes? That would be, I guess, the really hard part, right? But what kind of feedback did you get?
So I in particular did quite a lot of testing of all of the different variations as much as I could. And so we, ate a lot of variations on pot pie. And it was also really satisfying because I just cook things and make sure that they used up what I had. And so it was kind of a real life test case of what you might just have in your fridge, and sent them to friends and said, make this with what you've got and let me know what works and let me know what doesn't work, and kind of try to find the parts that were essential and then the parts that could be flexible. And I think, as we've discussed, this is going to be the cookbook where you might go way off piste and find yourself in a weird situation, and hopefully you can just eat it and move on. But ideally, we've given you just enough structure to kind of make sure things work, but also have let you play around with what you have.
We also had one of our friends, Jessica Coughlin, who's helped us kind of promote this book and build the brand around it. And she was a great test case because she is a very skilled home cook, but primarily someone who follows recipes more or less to a T. We have many friends like that. And we were excited about thinking like, okay, for someone who already has every cookbook, like what can we bring to their repertoire that is not already represented? And so giving someone who really likes that structure, this more free form kind of format for recipes, that was super helpful for us as well.
No, that's really smart. And that's what I really love about this book. If I turn to a page, I just turn to, Make It Your Way, Baba Ganoush, and it all fits on like one page. The text is really easy to read. The font choice, I think, is really smart. I can scan it, think, oh, well, I don't have this, but I have this. And I know this is the type of book where that's the whole point. And it's just very, very friendly that way. So I can see this appealing to me, to my mom, to kids. Like it really captures a wide range. And I know that takes so much work to do to make it look easy. So congratulations on this book. I wanted to ask, as we wrap up, what's next?
We're just thinking about that right now, actually. Irene is running May Dumplings, which is the newest iteration of what was our food truck and then our restaurant, and now is a dumpling factory / cafe / teaching space / wholesale purveyor of dumplings. And so we're doing a lot of thinking about dumplings. And so, we might kind of try to do something maybe not new there, but kind of do a cookbook around that's got some sort of creative twist.
Yeah, we're really open to going wherever kind of this journey takes us. I feel like we were really fortunate in that our first publisher, Roost, kind of let us write Double Awesome Chinese Food as like a flag in the ground about who we are and where we're from and what our perspective is. And I think that gave us a really strong foundation to explore these other areas. And I think we want to keep writing weird books. I don't think anyone who says like, I'm going to write something unoriginal.
I want to know where your brother fits into this. I mean, so there's three of you. What, is your brother ever going to get a piece of the action? Or are you like, yeah, he's good?
He is running his own wine bar and beer catering truck business. So he kind of took his own food business turn, and I think is really enjoying not having his little sisters trying to tell him what to do all the time. So he's managing to, he's running his own shop and loves it.
Yeah.
Amazing. This has been such a fun conversation. I think it's a perfect conversation to have in, kicking off 2024. So I want to thank you both for being with us.
It's been so fun. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you both so much.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is also available on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Any book mentioned on the show can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.